first, while you get yourselves settled, I will do a quick introduction of myself, so you know who's actually talking to you. I'm Mary Hayes Gordon. I am a board member at Sculpture Space. In my day job, I work with students grades 7 through 12, hence my ability to get your attention without a microphone. So, I welcome you all here tonight, and I have got the pleasure of being the one to introduce our guest tonight, to introduce Nneka. So Nneka is our first long-term resident, and she's setting the bar pretty high. Not only is she influencing this new step that Sculpture Space is taking, but she is also influencing a new generation of artists. While she is here in Utica, she is teaching at Pratt Munson. She's teaching Space Form Process, which is an introduction to design class, and mold making, which is a very cool offering, I think, there. One of the things that I was thinking about when I was thinking about Nneka is that she brings the gifts that artists bring to the world here, to her work here in the studio and as a teacher. And to me, those gifts are a unique perspective, a strong curiosity, and a spirit of exploration. And I think you will see that when she speaks tonight. She earned her BFA in textiles from Georgia State and her MFA from the School of Art Institute of Chicago in the Fiber and Materials Studies Department. Her work has been exhibited throughout the country, including Chicago, Newport, Rhode Island, Louisville, Kentucky, her hometown of Atlanta, Georgia, and soon, Utica, New York. I asked Nneka when we were chatting the other day what resonates with her about Utica. And she replied, the generosity she has met in all areas, from the grocery store to the library, and especially the people at Sculpture Space. So we as Uticans are glad she's received a warm welcome from our community, and we welcome her warmly tonight as she shares her thoughts with us. Nneka?
Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight, and thank you, Mary, for that amazing introduction. I don't know if I should sit up here, and I'll probably wait until me and DeWitt actually have a conversation, but maybe to talk briefly about the experience that I've had since I've arrived in Utica. I found out about Sculpture Space, I want to say maybe a year before I applied, and never hearing of Utica, I always, just kind of considered the Northeast a place that I would eventually end up. Not because I was born in the South, Atlanta, Georgia. Went to Chicago, so I was Midwest for 2 years. And then I came back to the South, and I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna go up to the Northeast, but once I saw that Sculpture Space had an opportunity, and I started doing research on the city of Utica, and the fact that it had been an old industrial town, where or realizing that it had so many old textile mills and the first place of industry and studying textiles, I was just like, okay, this is a space that I want to explore.
Hello.
This is a space that I feel is ripe for something. And as an artist who kind of works in between the present and the past, I thought once I arrived in Utica and saw the space, I was like, what does it mean to make work in a city that has the past that it contends with kind of every day? And to have a legacy that is present, but is also sparse, but like here in the conversations. Like you hear it in the discussions of the people you meet at the grocery store, or at the bar, or at Pratt Munson. You're just like, okay, what is the past to me? How am I contending with the past in the studio? And I've always kind of done this in terms of my process or what braiding and hair means for me and a connection to ancestry. But how can I have a conversation with that in this space that's also feeling like it's in a transition or in a moment of discovery of, okay, we're here at this moment with what has happened. What do we do with that? What can we do with that? And I think that's the way that I've kind of been hoping to explore in the studio. You know, just let alone to have the freedom to make in Utica. You know, like I feel in Atlanta, you know, not saying that I didn't have a space to make, but you know, I was making very much in a home studio. And to come here and have such an expansive space and the opportunity to come to the studio 24/7. So if I like have a desire at 2 or 3 in the morning to like make something, I can like literally get out of bed and walk and come into the studio. And just to have that freedom is something that as an artist, you cherish so much after you leave like a space like school, where I feel like in grad school in Chicago, I had the opportunity to stay late at the studio. But, you know, during the pandemic and making it home, you're like, that becomes a different dynamic. But here, especially when the other artists come and they're here for 2 months, it's like, it feels another like resurgence of energy for me. And like, okay, they've just arrived. I'm still like in the process of like, please don't talk to me. Like I'm in the midst of like, I don't know what this is, but I think it's gonna be great. I don't know if you're gonna think it's gonna be great. I just don't wanna talk about it. But having them come and like see Utica and me to give them like little gems like, oh, the market grocer, guys. Everything is so cheap there, it's so amazing. But giving them those little gems, but having them just explore the studio as well, like enlivens me. So every time a new cohort comes, I'm like, okay, like another chance to meet artists from all over the nation, all over the world. And I start to see kind of how they're making trails into my work. And it enlivens me again to think that, no, we don't make in a vacuum. Like, we make in a world that exists of other people, and they feed the work just as much as sitting alone in my studio with the door closed, just looking at the work feeds it. It all is a culmination of all of that. And I'm just so grateful to have the opportunity to be here. And even though I hate the cold, the winter, supposedly this is not the worst winter though. Like, I've gotta that's what I'm saying. And I'm from the South, so this is not easy for me. But it's just been great. Even with the slush, you know, when I lived in Chicago, I didn't have a car, so it was great transit and just great snow boots. And now it's like, oh, I have to learn how to drive in the snow. So that's just like another way of existing in the world too. Or like understanding distance and space or an enclosed space. So I don't know, it's been a ride so far, and I'm excited to see what more research I have to do for the performance. And I don't know if I should talk about this now or I should wait for conversation to talk about it, but you know, I proposed coming to Utica with like a performance or an activation, something that kind of extended from the way I'm thinking about space and art making and community that started in Atlanta, that I kind of want to trail into Utica. That's inspired by the Green Book, which is safe spaces that, you know, Black folks and other folks of color. I just kind of actually had a discussion with an Indigenous weaver who told me that she was learning about her ancestry and found out that her family also used the Green Book to guide them. So thinking of, you know, not this totem or this guide map as just something for Black folks, but something for many folks who felt lost or that a space wasn't safe for them, that they would be in danger. So that, it just expands it so much for me. And so to also bring it to Utica and to hear about, because in the Green Book at first, when I proposed something to do here, there's a place on Baxter Street that was in the Green Book. And at first, you know, I've looked at the place, it's a completely different space now than it was in the 30s when this book was published. But then someone else told me about Club George, and that it used to be a jazz club here, and it existed for decades on Liberty Street. And the building is still here. Of course, it's boarded up. And, you know, it's just, it's the life of things. You know, not saying that, I mean, most of the places that I contend with are the relics of what used to be. And there's something I enjoy about that. Because it's never going to be the same as it was.
Then you've come to the right place.
But it's, how do we remember those places? Or how do we enliven those spaces just for a moment? Because they did exist for a moment. You know, in the span of life, these spaces existed for a moment and they meant something to those people. And they meant something to history. And I don't want that to get lost once, you know, life happens and things transform and become other things. And, you know, it's things you want to hold on to. So I've been doing a lot of research at the public library. Haven't really been pulling a lot of information about Club George. So throwing it out there, if anybody.
Have you been to the Oneida History Center? Do you know Robbie Dancy?
I've actually spoken with Robbie Dancy.
I'm glad.
And we can thank Mary for making that introduction. So, no, we stood outside of Club George and I listened to her story about her mother and her father and what that space was. And I feel like, oh, it's more than enough. I feel like just existing in a space, like you could stand there and that is a performance within itself. But to just hear her words or what it meant to her, I'm like, more, what more can I learn about Club George? And I just think it's so interesting at the fact that, I mean, my eyes are bleeding because I have been scouring that microfilm of the Utica Daily Press. But, I mean, it's exciting within itself, though, to get a little Utica history just going through the newspapers at that time. But, so if anybody, though, has any information or know of that space, or if anybody knows great jazz musicians, we don't know what that could be, but I'm in the process of planning what it would be to activate that space. And that's kind of what the odes are. They're not trying to reclaim a space and make it something. It's just a conversation that happens at a moment. It's erected and then it disappears just as it comes. And the introduction, kind of thinking about land and space, is not about kind of like claiming or monumentalizing a space or a moment. But it's just about activating a space, having a conversation, having a dialogue, engaging the community. Like moving bodies, not about something that seeks to claim land or space. It is for all of us and everyone to enjoy, where you don't have to pay to see it. You don't have to feel intimidated. It's just performers that come. And I remember when I did it in Atlanta, it was just like random, a little girl. Well, there were kids that were playing in like, I wanna say playground. That was, I wanna like 50 feet away from where me and my mom were kind of activating the space. And they didn't know what it was, and she came to me after we were like done. She's like, "What is this?" She's like, "Are you guys filming a movie?" And I was like, "No, we're doing like an art performance." And she was like, "Can I be a part of it?" And that for me was just like more than like my friends or me and my mom even like having such an emotional moment at that space. It was just the fact that she heard our performance. She saw it when she was just going to play with her friends. Like this was not, at a center, this wasn't at school, this wasn't a field trip, this was just, I felt like in a way, it seemed like it was for her. And she came and was like, "Oh, could I be a part of it?" I was like, maybe next time, But just that she has that in her mind, and that's what art can do. That's why I believe that these odes are more than just making something. They're a conversation that only exists in documentation and maybe oral histories. Okay. I would also probe you guys just to come and like peek into my studio for some of the things that I've been working on, because of course at the end of my residency there will be a solo exhibition, and that will be more involved with me thinking about form and hair and what the Black feminine experience, amalgamation of a bunch of things, can be, is becoming. So I'm always thinking about what something is doing. So it feels as if it's always in transition. Like I never want something to be fixed. So if you just think about that as you look at the work. And maybe also that won't come to you because it can be subjective at times, and some people may come to me and say something completely different about the work, and I will say, but hair is always something that I feel pulls from the past to the present. It's something that is so personal to me, but I think is so universal, and that everybody has an experience with hair. I mean, from looking at Victorian hair jewelry, and even when I first came to Utica, I think the first week, Dan Buckingham was like, "Have you heard about Victorian hair jewelry?" And I'm like, "Yes, Dan." And I'm so glad that you are thinking about that, or that because it's so specific, but the detail or the braiding or the type of lacing that goes into hair, the relics and the memories that are evoked are just like to have that, the person on you. And most of the time it's like people who died in war, you know, and they have specialized makers who go to school to learn how to braid, to weave these things. And, you know, as a textile person who is also a sculptor, I have a love for both of those disciplines. And I think they both inform the work. So when I think about braiding, I'm thinking about textile, I'm thinking about history, I'm thinking about interlocking. I'm thinking about how, like, prehistoric communities were using this to first weave baskets, to carry, you know, agriculture, to carry their things that, you know, were passages, trade. Like, textiles for me are so deep and embedded in the history of my making and hair, and how that's even not fully talked about in terms of textile histories as well. So, thank you all, and I think maybe we should start with the conversation.
Board member of Sculptor Space as well, and he will lead our conversation with Nneka.
Thank you, Ray. We just have the one mic for now. Okay, so thank you. And I love, I've heard about your work a few times now. I mean, we've had several, there we go. So we've had a number of conversations, you know, both casual and more formal. And I was, when Tom asked me if I would to do this, I was glad we'd have a chance to talk some more. And this is like sort of return to the hair, right? And we've talked about this a little bit, but you know, in terms of hair as a certain kind of identity formation, and particularly in African American women, and so you know, I'm thinking of like an artist like Lorna Simpson, right? Who's uses hair or its transformation as a way of sort of marking African American women's experience over the last century, let's say. You know, I know that it extends both there, but can you talk? So, but I'd like to hear about how you've talked about your hair in personal terms, right? And just talk more about how do you see your work fitting in with that? You know, what's now a certain kind of tradition in art, in contemporary art, particularly with African American women artists who are using hair or its fashioning as a way of talking about not only identity but also experience.
I think that's such a great question. Thank you so much for that. So I want to say that I definitely take pride in being a part of the legacy of contemporary artists specifically who have been using hair as a way of making, as a methodology for making. I think one of the first artists who I was introduced to when I first started working with hair was Sonia Clark. And you know, how her work very much so is driven in the social, political, and Lorna Simpson very much so as well, speaking to, you know, a Black feminine experience and what hair means. And for me, hair is not only like a symbol of self-fashioning and empowerment, but it's also a tool. And it's a tool that's been used to both suppress and to empower and as a form of safety for Black women. We can think of stories that have been coming out recently about how Black women used to braid seeds into each other's hair, seeds and grains during the Middle Passage, so that during enslavement they had relics or, nourishment from home. Or thinking about how weave and having straight hair and using it as a protective style to be able to exist in a corporate world. So that if you wear braids or cornrows or twists, it's somebody can't say that you're being unprofessional. It's just, hair is such a complicated material that I haven't even fully discovered exactly what it is materially, and even fully what it means to be a Black woman. Because we can look at popular culture and see a certain thing. We can look at, what's being advertised or even who's having certain conversations around here. We can think about the Crown Act. And how, even the state that I'm from, Georgia, they won't even pass the Crown Act to say that you can't be discriminated against because of your hair. And how does it feel so urgent for me to be making work about Black hair at a time like this? And you think we're in 2024, people should just exist in their difference. So, I hope that.
Yeah, that does, and I was reading about the Lorna Simpson's pieces, the group who uses the wave, right? Or this, and as you mentioned, as a form of assimilation, right? Of finding an acceptable hair that was professional or would pass. But I'm glad you mentioned Sonia Clark, because while clearly there's this connection between identity and history in the way you talk about your work and the use of hair, textiles, etc., but I see it more like Sonia uses it as material, not simply as a kind of that it in its shape or style expresses or doesn't express certain kinds of either empowerment or retreat. And I hope you get a chance to go into Nneka's studio, because there's these wonderful steel barrels that are being sort of repaired or kept in relationship by these braided strands of hair, and it's quite, the combination of the steel and the hair to me is quite sort of exceptional, right? And for me it moves your work sort of past simple while it's this identity piece is, as you express it, is clear, it's also like doing something, right? In something that's unexpected, right? It's not decorative, it's not done to quote any particular kind of fashion, it's literally like working, right? So I'm curious about, because I was thinking about Sonia's work sort of in comparison to Lorna Simpson. There's a lot of overlap there, but there's a real distinct difference in the way that Sonia employs hair, I should say, is the best way to put it.
Yeah, I feel like the difference in my work is, I'm not saying I want it to be what it is, but I want to have a pure expression of what each of the material is. Like, it's not an illusion to be something. And that has never been the thing that I've enjoyed from my making, so to say, is creating something that is something other than what it is. No, I want you to see what that material is doing, what it can do. And to have like something as fragile as hair, and even, you know, this like synthetic hair, and that has absolutely really no strength to hold that barrel. Like it's literally the knot, or it's literally how I've like spun it and bent it with the holes that I've plasma cut that allow it to create its form. Like, yeah, I want it to be a material itself. Like it is the history, but also it's anything just like paint or just like clay. And I don't feel as if it's been kind of unpacked enough as a material. And so that's kind of the exciting part for me, is like, how do I use it in conversation with other materials? It's more of a beginning exploration.
Yeah, because there's even some places in these barrels where it looks like the barrels are growing hair. Right? They're, you know, the hair is sort of, you know, there's other places where it's clearly tied and put together, but there's places where it kind of just looks as if it sort of just grew there, kind of in a row, the way it's been stitched in.
I mean, I think I have like that is similar to a piece that I have that's like the hair coming out of the wall. And the infiltration of structure, of form, you know? And like, it's not trying to change the form. Like, because I just feel like I've already have to contend with it. Like, it's already here. So, how do I, you say, engage with it? And the first thing I kind of thought about was inserting it or becoming part of it in some form of way. And not saying that you could ever get like hair to become steel or steel to become this hair. But how can I explore infiltration as the word, or insertion as the word, and that it becomes something completely alternative, but seems also very precarious and about to kind of break at any moment.
Yeah, well, I mean, in all textiles, you know, the sort of the miracle of textiles is a bunch of very, very thin on their own. Weak elements are combined.
A strand is very strong. One strand is very strong.
But it's not as strong as 6 strands.
True.
Right, and so that's, I mean, it's not that, I guess it's not that there's.
It depends on what you need that strand for.
Right, sure. Yes. There's times when you just need a single strand.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure people have questions, but I'd like to ask one more, since you talked about the odes and some of the things that you're thinking about doing here. I just, maybe if you could give people a little more context about the project in Atlanta, and I was quite interested in the site of this sort of community that was sort of purpose-built and became a thriving African-American community, and then through the vicissitudes of market and movement and migration is now, you know, in a very short period of time is now a sort of a ruin, right, or a relic of something thriving but that didn't survive. And I think that it's interesting to me how you cite that, you know, by going there. It's almost like going to visit a cemetery, right? It's almost like going to visit your, you know, a place of memory, or a battlefield. Maybe that maybe is a better description, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, that's where something happened, right? And you have to imagine the world that was there or what was happening, right, through your presence.
Oh, I love the battlefield, even though I feel like it's always a battlefield in a certain type of way. But as a kid growing up there, because I want to speak specifically about the last ode, which the odes kind of stemmed out of me wanting to have a conversation about George Floyd, about Breonna Taylor, and wanted to do it in a way that didn't feel like protesting in the streets. Even though that was something that I did, that didn't feel like something that I could say through an artistic practice. Or would have the space to do what I needed it to do, which is have a conversation. And I first wanted to go to places in Atlanta where I lived as a kid. And, you know, having the struggles that I had in my family at the times that we lived in these places, I wanted to go back and have a conversation, because watching what has been happening to the city for the past 10 years, like after, well, I really want to say like 2015, it kind of truly started, but now it's like the places where I lived, you're like, oh wow, you see a very nice renovated home. You know, it's now on the west side of Atlanta. That's a beautiful, like the West End is nice, it's $1 million. And you think about who used to live there before. And I'm like, a part of me, you know, feels defeatist and like, everyone has said this before, like, what am I gonna say new to the conversation? But you can't sit there and not say something. So I got with a couple of my friends and I'm like, let's go out, let's enliven that space, let's have a conversation. And so I started from the places where I lived because I felt that that felt true to me. And that in order to work out whatever this was happening in the world, whatever that we needed to hold on to, which at the time was during the pandemic. So you're so away from everybody that outside is kind of the only place you can be with people. So it's like, we were outside, I said, hey, gather, come with your mask. This is where we'll be. And most of these spaces were condemned, so there were no trespassing. But I put it out there to the community, please come. You are confronted with the signs, but people came. And even the people who live there, and that's another thing that I wanted to make apparent, is the fact that you have to come to a space and you're literally contending with the fact that there are people who still live next to a condemned area. Like, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean that I have, not saying I have to come here, but this is my legacy. I still, even though I don't exist next to it, we have to be together in community. We have to still speak for those who can't speak for themselves. And that's what the odes are to do, is not only to speak about the past, but it's to have those personal relationships with land. It's to have the awareness that we don't exist in a vacuum, and that this entire space we exist with together, and how do we honor it? How do we cultivate it? How do we, use community to make it flourish? And I just wanted to show that, you don't need this to have art in your life, to make an impact, to say the things, to have a true conversation. And that can exist anywhere, because land exists wherever our feet are present. So we can have a conversation anywhere with anybody. And I think that's just kind of what I wanted to do, and I wanted to start with something personal. And I felt like now that I've done that in Atlanta, it can live other places.
Thank you. Any questions? Robert?
All of this stuff. So, thank you. It's amazing. I was kind of entertained. It's like, my question is, have you seen The Gilded Age? What a TV show, The Gilded Age.
I've heard of the Gilded Age. I've seen the advertisements. I have not watched it.
Because it's a recreation of a time in history, right? Which has a lot of issues, social issues involved. But what's so remarkable about it is that they tried to make it contemporary. They tried to explore narratives from people that maybe wouldn't have been heard from then so easily, right? I find it fascinating because when I hear you talk, I think about the people who were making that. Were they thinking the same way somehow? Because there's a lot about hair at times in there. Because it was so important to women then, no matter what race, if you've seen it, it was so important hair was, and in an almost like exaggerated way, right? Anyway, I just wanted to ask that question because I kept thinking, the Gilded Age, why?
I mean, I think technically in the media right now, especially in terms of TV, cinema, the past is something that we can't run away from. Like, we're all kind of exploring it, and you see it in many different facets. And yes, but also I feel like maybe the Gilded Age is doing a disservice to hair because hair, like, that's an everybody's story.
Yeah.
Like, and yes, it's something to be associated, like, with women, so to say, because that's the way that patriarchy has framed it. But no, like, everybody has if we go into a confessional, we all got a story.
Yeah, well, what about Louis Couture's and all the wigs that were worn
Yes.
by men as
I mean-
made as women.
Yeah.
So I think, to say that it is just a woman, I think that's not telling the whole story.
It's a narrative, though.
I understand it makes sense. You understand because you are a woman and you can speak from that. I can't speak for Louis Couture's, but I can, I have looked and read. But that was one of the things that I thought about when you said of what was going on with hair. And it has always been some kind of now a tool, as you say, or a stigma, or
I mean,
what did they do to say
it's everything. That's what I'm saying. It's expression. It's a tool. It's a existence. It's a lineage. Because I mean, even before we can say the Gilded Age, like, hair was used by African cultures as like spiritual, like ancestry, relics. Like, they had it in caps, they had it in amulets. Like, these were, even before thinking about wigs, they were in spiritual connections to ancestries and the spirit world, supernatural, cosmology. Like, hair is involved in that too. It predates even thinking about the Gilded Age, which is why I feel like it's such a rich history that, we don't fully explore, because also, like, it's a natural material oftentimes. So I'm working with synthetic and natural hair, but when we think about some of the objects that existed in BC that some of these museums and institutions have, they're lucky enough to have it because they have the facilities to house it, but some of them that were buried or still existing with these cultures are gone. So I think that's also a beautiful thing about hair too, is that depending on the space that it's conserved in, it's ephemeral. It doesn't last.
Just to follow on and say that, we know that men care about hair too, yes.
Yeah.
A lot of money to do things. Elon Musk. A lot of money to do things because that's how important it is, right? It's like a lot of money.
I remember growing up to some Bosley infomercials.
In your performances, have you had conversations with people who have joined you about how your performance or art enables them to process these terrible tragedies and murders in a way that just reading the news, for instance, doesn't allow a person to process that terrible information. I mean, what role does art play in our lives that enables us to take it in?
I mean, I don't think art does really anything different in terms of taking the tragedies of the world in. You know, I don't think it's trying to do anything different. It's just another way of expression. Because
My question is more about helping people process it.
well, that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's meant to like help process. Like when I do a performance, I'm not thinking about how this will help people process. If anything, you may feel a little worse. Like depending on the site that you come to.
Right.
You know, like you may leave feeling a little more intense than you did. So
That is actually to my point. I only raised this because the feeling I had after reading Beloved really made me understand how a woman could murder her own child in a way that reading a newspaper article about it never would have. Do you know what I'm saying?
yeah.
So the people that you are in your performance or have experienced your performance, have you talked to them about how your work might help them process all that terrible history that we experienced in 2020?
Well, no one has reached out after they've been there and asked me or told me that how it's affected them. But I could only hope that in some way in their life that it does. I don't think that, because that's even with work that's displayed. Like people, you really don't know how it affects someone or how it changes someone's life until maybe months or years after, or maybe until they encounter you and say, hey, like I saw that and that meant something to me.
Right.
So I don't know if I can really answer that question.
Okay, thank you for considering it in any case.
Thank you.
Steve?
A couple of comments, I guess, or questions, I suppose. And they're really kind of from your earlier conversation on the floor and from your discussion about hair. I've been talking with Tony Thompson, a lot of us know him, and he uses a tooth imagery a lot, and we've been talking, and he says, well, this tooth died, and I said, no, the tooth didn't die, the person died. And to me, it's kind of an interesting thing, this just sort of comment, that like fingernails and teeth and hair stick around for a long time. And it doesn't matter what the color of your skin is and who you are. And when I was at the Mummers Museum in Philly years ago, I saw the braiding and lacing of the hair from people that are, 200 years gone. And I said, well, that's kind of cool. And I guess I don't really have a question, but it strikes me as quite compelling that that's a long-lasting textile, But the thing I was, and this might be related to Mary's question in a way, with Club George, and your discussion about the boarded up building in the past and the little child interacting with you. And I think sometimes we're caught up in trying to make a difference or make a statement or make an impact, when I think a lot of this important stuff emerges. It's one of my favorite concepts, that it's almost like you can't, we can't make a photograph, we can't set up a candid photograph. That it happens because it's candid. And I think my view of what artists do is to do the emotional, responsive gestures, and I think in the hope that maybe 2 months from now, it'll make a difference. And with the Club George illusion that, well, should we resurrect that and make that a memorial and do the historical thing, or should we experience the emergence and let's see what happens, you know? And again, that's not really,
Maybe do both.
really a question, but it's kind of this, like, let's do the right thing, let's be artists and respond and express, and hopefully over the long term it's gonna make a difference, you know? So, anyway, thank you.
Thank you. And also, let's get more artists to do that. Let's get more artists and more people to enliven, transform, make space, alter space. Because it's not just us as artists who can do that. I think we, as artists, inspire others to want to do the same. And that's what I hope that the work does. I mean, if anything, of course we would like the work to make an impact, but I feel like that's such a grand ask for something that I feel is such a privilege to be able to do.
And I think it'll accumulate and emerge, you know?
Emerging, aren't we always?
And even if that connection doesn't come back to the artist, that it's still been transformative to someone, it's
Exactly.
really important.
Exactly.
And, but I don't wanna go into it too much, but the idea of hair, has expressed so much goodness and horror. I'm thinking of indigenous children, that the removal of their hair, Auschwitz.
Yes,
Hair carries historical DNA. Thank you for doing the work you do.
Thank you, Pepper, for that.
Well, I'd just like to just say, talking about art, I think the work that you're describing and your processes, I always like to say that art is a sort of space of speculation, right? It's just where we can open up space for, and provide an experience for the viewer that they may or may not respond to, right? But I feel like the art it's an offering almost all the time, right? So, here's something I understand, here's something different, and I'm giving you the opportunity to share in this, and you hope for the best, right? Yeah, I mean it's this idea of impact, right? And I think art is most, well, I can't say that. I think if you're, when you're doing work that works in places that have a deep and contested history, or you work with materials that, as Jen said, have both, things that you can, glorify and things that you can despise, right, that can be represented by the material or hair. What am I trying to say? Lost my train of thought.
Is there no hope for artists working without hair? Like, everyone who doesn't work with hair, you should
No, I
go to my video
I think that if you want, having to try to do one thing, right? Or hoping or reducing your work to, when it has, all work, we all live in a context of politics and culture and history, that it's inescapable. But, sometimes when you try to grapple with that in a, I'm gonna do this, right? So that people will know that I think you cut yourself off from some of the power that art brings, right? And I guess it's sort of what Mary was saying about the.
I think there's also a bit of a problem, at least I'm kind of having that problem, that I've seen something that you've actually done, that might make it a lot more clear as to where, what am I sitting here listening for if I don't know and understand what it is that you're saying. If that's kind of going, well, what is back again,
Well, just say that words will never speak for the art. It's the material, it's the feeling, it's the looking at what it does that makes it what it is. I'm not a writer, If I was a writer, I could have every single word for the work. That would be the work. But I'm a maker. It's in my hand. It's in the time that I spend with it that will reveal itself. And to your question, no, I don't say that it's this, it's this, it's this. I am clear what it's not, though. I am very clear of when it starts to get into a territory, then I'm like, yeah, I see that it can be read that way, but this is what it's not. And I think that's the beauty of when you know what you're doing as an artist, is that you don't close it off, but you know how to navigate the work. You know what you're speaking to. And that's what I'm doing. I'm speaking to something that I feel like will be a journey forever.
Cute.